colleagues, warm welcome to all the colleagues that are connected to this webinar. My name is Haje Schütte. I'm heading at the OECD the work on financing for development. And it's a great pleasure that I'm the moderator of today's webinar on financing water, part of the Green Talks live organized by the OECD. Let me just say I'm going to do a short framing of the topic, and then thereafter two of my colleagues here from the OECD, Xavier, Leflaive, and Kathleen, Dominique, will give you a presentation that you can follow, that will set the scene basically, and then thereafter we have the great pleasure to have Esther Delbourg from AXA with us, and she will give also some key messages in regard to AXA's water strategy and the links to the financial challenges that we see. And then I think that's for those of you that are listening, I think this key is our intention is clear to give you quite a bit of time to basically respond to your questions. So please don't hesitate to send your questions via the chat section of your WebEx screen. So just to set the scene, we are all aware of the massive SDG financing gap. The question is, how much is it? We know it's very, very substantial. We also know that public money will not be able to meet that financing gap. So what we need is basically an integrated approach that capitalizes to the maximum based on all the different development finance flows that are available. We here at the OECD, we talk about pursuing an integrated and holistic approach in doing so. The short story is we need to grow the pie, basically to be able to do both. One on the hand, have concessional financing, which is being provided by the rich north, if you like, in the form of official development aid, also where it's most needed, and that's in, for example, LDCs. But at the same time also use this concessional finance in a smart way that will allow us basically to leverage other resources. So at the OECD internally, we have come up with a very innovative acronym of MIT. You know, you will now all think about the famous university in Chicago. No, it is not. It is standing for maximizing. So making the maximum of available resources for impact and in support of a transformative, so that's where the T comes from, for a transformative agenda. As you all know, private finance is very much part of this integrated approach and of the MIT story. One topic we will talk about more in depth now is also blended finance and its abilities and chances, but also challenges when it comes to financing water in developing countries. Just to do a very short propaganda pitch here from our side, the OECD with other actors have been working very, very actively on the issue of blended finance. So last year, the OECD has defined what blended finance is. Secondly, we have issued principles on mobilizing and how blended finance could be done. We did a survey. There have been a massive report, I think a very nice report that capitalized on surveys and many replies from DAC members and OECD members out beginning of this year. And also I think just to say that obviously mobilizing private finance is very much a collaborative effort. There are a lot of other players in there, just to mention maybe a couple of them. There are, for example, a group led by IFC, made up of MDBs and DFIs that have or are dealing with blended finance issues. There's the Business Commission for Sustainable Development. It has a task force, very interesting report, well to read. There's the World Economic Forum that together with the OECD has launched a platform called SDIP, the Sustainable Development Investment Platform. Just to mention, maybe Oxfam from CSOs has published on blended finance. And needless to say that obviously this also supports the work being done at the UN, being led by UN DESA, who, as you know, is the, if you like, UN custodian agency for the follow-up process of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. So that's maybe a quick overview. Lots happening. I think a lot of progress being made. Quite a number of challenges, nevertheless, especially when it comes to sectors like water, where basically, yes, there is an economic case, but financing case has not followed as much as we, I think, would all hope to. And that's what we are going to talk about. And with that, it's my pleasure now to hand over to Xavier and Kathleen for a presentation of some 15 minutes. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Haje, and I would like to say good afternoon to first colleagues in the room, but also good afternoon to you who are interacting with us online. I would like to take a few minutes of the time this afternoon to explain briefly the rationale of OECD work on financing water, and I will then give the floor to Kathleen, who will take you more into the substance of ongoing work. For those of you who are already working with us, I have a few slides which may be repetitive, but stay with us because more on substance will come in a minute. The first point I would like to make is that we know that lack of investment in water has severe consequences. It has severe consequences on economic development, on health, on environment. You are familiar with these figures already. I'm not going to take you through all of them in details, but various institutions, including the OECD, but also the World Bank and colleagues from the UN, have tried to put figures to document these harmful consequences of lack of investments in water. These figures are probably well known in the water community, and still they should not be considered as fatalities. At the OECD, we really see them as a call for action because we definitely want to have an impact and make sure there is a change. That chart goes into the same direction. The point here is to say that we know that investment in water drives growth. The small dots on the chart are water basins, and the color of the dots reflects the level of development of that basin. And I won't go too much into the detail, but the point here is that the river basins that have developed either benefit from reliable access to water or have invested invested in water security, in particular in water storage. So here the point is quite clear that there is a very robust case, a strong economic case for investments in water. Just for the record, that slide is taken from a groundbreaking report from, called Securing Water, Sustaining Growth, coordinated by Claudia Sadov and a very international large team of experts. So we know that there is a strong economic case to invest in water. In addition to that, we also know the scale of the challenge. These two charts illustrate that. On the left-hand side, we refer to an estimate made by Guy Hutton that to achieve universal access to safe and affordable drinking water, we'll have to essentially multiply by 3 the level of investment into the sector. On the right-hand side, you have another chart which gives you the range of the different estimates of the overall financing needs in water infrastructure. So the right-hand chart is larger than the left one because it covers more than water supply, sanitation, and wash. It covers all types of water infrastructure, including protecting against flood risks or storage. The point here is that just to give you an idea of the scale, the magnitude of the challenge, there are some uncertainties about the accurate level of investment, but apart from these debates, there is no, what is not debatable is the scale and the magnitude of the challenge. The good news is that when you talk to financiers, they say money is not an issue. Money is available in the finance community. So really the challenge is not to make that money available, is to make sure that that money will flow to water-related investments, and that it will flow to investment that will contribute to water security and sustainable growth. And that's why the OECD, with a couple of partners, we set up a roundtable on financing water. That roundtable was set up last year. It's a joint initiative with the World Water Council, but also with the governments of the Netherlands. We had an inaugural meeting here in Paris about a year ago, and a second meeting was hosted by Israel in Tel Aviv in September in the context of WATEC. The roundtable is what it says here on the chart. It's a global public-private platform to facilitate the flow of financing and investment that contribute to water security and sustainable growth. The idea is to bring together the water community and the finance community so that they can have a structured and substantial discussion. Because for over the last decade, I've been active in these areas, and I keep hearing the water community saying we need more money. But now, if the finance community can confirm that money is available, the idea was to try to bridge that gap between these two communities. One final point I would like to make is that the roundtable tries to reflect the diversity of the water community, but also of financiers. In the past, when we referred to private finance in the water sector, we implicitly alluded to private operators of water supply and sanitation services. I think we now better understand that there is a wider range of finance institutions which should be part of the conversation and which have a role to play. These include institutional investors and pension funds. But this also include commercial banks, insurance companies, and that's why we're very grateful to have AXA here with us, and Esther representing AXA here with us this evening. So that's really the level of ambition of the roundtable: bring this diversity of financiers together with water people to engage in a robust discussion, so that over the years we can come up with some very practical and action-oriented recommendation on how to bridge the financing gap. How that can be done in practice, I will leave it to Kathleen to answer that question, as Kathleen will take you more concretely into the program of work that is now being undertaken in the context of the roundtable.
Okay. Great, thank you very much, Xavier. After we've had these two important meetings with the Roundtable on Financing Water, and also building on the work that we've done for many years on financing water and consulting with colleagues internally, we've identified three main themes for our current and ongoing work. And the first is around mapping financing flows. Analytical work on financing water has been generally greatly impeded by a lack of data and patchy information. We realize that this is a problem. It's very time-consuming to address, but we need to get started somewhere. Mapping the financing flows is something that can certainly help to identify the ultimate sources of capital for water investments, the level of current investment, who are the different players at different stages of investment, as well as the different channels and vehicles that can facilitate investment in water security. And to get started on this dimension, we are working with the European Commission to estimate financing needs until 2050 for water supply, sanitation, and flood protection in the 28 EU member states. So the needs analysis basically looks at business as usual needs for water supply and sanitation. Then it also looks at estimated financing needs to reach full compliance for the relevant water directives of the Commission. Then it also looks at estimates financing needs for flood protection, does that at 5-year increments from 2015 up to 2050. At the same time, we also want to have an understanding of what is the financing capacity in different countries. So for each of these 28 member countries, we're looking at what are the sources of financing in terms of the current financing strategies, whether those are public expenditures from public budgets, household expenditures, whether EU funds have contributed, or there have been loans from EIB and or commercial banks. At the same time, we want to have some kind of idea around future financing capacity at national level as well, which basically requires a panel of indicators that can give us a sense around where's a margin of maneuver in terms of the ability to price water, ability to raise public spending, ability to track private finance. So this is the analysis that's being done for each of the member countries. And then the idea is to identify, a subset of countries, maybe 8 to 10, that have the greatest challenges in terms of greatest investment need, but perhaps most constrained capacity. After that, we'll have a second phase of the work, which will look more in depth at those countries and the specific policies and investment environment, and come up with some strategies that could support sustainable financing in each country. The outcomes here are going to be, of course, of great interest just in and of themselves, but also in terms of the methods, the metrics, the data, and the policy options will really help to pave the way for replication of this type of work in a broader range of countries, which we hope to pursue in the future. The second area is really looking at the policy environment and taking most advantage of policies that can be designed in a way that really reflect the value of water. As Xavier has said, water is an underpriced and undervalued resource. And we've been discussing this issue for quite some time, where we have the costs on one hand, and we have the ultimate sources of funding. For many years, OECD has advocated what is basically a sustainable cost recovery approach that emphasizes 3 ultimate sources of funding, commonly known as the 3 Ts. If you're familiar with OECD work in this area, you're probably familiar with the 3 T. These are tariffs, taxes, and transfers. Transfers are basically represent funding that comes from development aid or philanthropy. They may or may not, typically do not cover the full costs required for both operations and maintenance and investment costs. Those are the 3 Ts there. Some recent work has suggested options for revisiting the 3 Ts, notably, for example, with regard to tariffs. In many advanced countries, cities are really coping with the challenge of raising sufficient revenue while they also are having a decline in water consumption. So this can require different types of tariff design or different types of revenue generation strategies. There's also some options to look at new kinds of taxes potentially. Value capture is one we hear often about in terms of some isolated examples, not very widespread at this stage, but could be have some scope for further use. Also, public good charges can be ways to try to capture the benefits from certain investments and generate a funding stream from that. Also, we recognize that self-financed investments, whether that's at the household level or firm level, for example, farmers investing in pumps or water-saving devices, this is something that's typically not captured at all in any kind of analysis or data, but should be recognized as a potential source of funding. Now, increases in funding from those 3 sources can help to close the financing gap, but in addition, the cash flows from those three sources can help mobilize additional repayable finance. And this actually leads us back to this theme of blended finance that Haje reflected at the beginning. This is, of course, a topic that's gaining increasing attention. This is a figure that comes from the work of our DCD colleagues and their recent publication on the topic. In the case of water, so basically what we see here is the concept of blended finance and how development finance can be used to mobilize then additional commercial finance. In the case of water and sanitation, as mentioned also at the beginning, investments have traditionally relied really heavily on public finance. And while efficient development finance to water and sanitation has increased steadily over the past decade, it still represents only a fraction of the needs. In our view, there's still some more work to be done to understand how and when blended finance can be used in a water context, and that includes getting a better understanding of what are really the main barriers to crowding in commercial investors, which types of blended finance instruments might be most appropriate for which types of water investments, because we're talking really about diverse types of investments, and in which country context. And this is why we're currently developing joint work with our DCD colleagues to try to delve into those questions at a deeper level. Finally, I'll just finish with our third stream of work, and this basically focuses on what we call pathways for investment. And this theme of work recognizes that we're not only interested in the quantity of investment and just repeating the rehearsed line of needing more money, but also in terms of we're interested also in the quality of investment. And while financiers are typically interested in developing a pipeline of bankable projects, which is also something you often hear in these discussions, governments also really need to situate those pipelines within a broader strategic approach that ensures that the investments that are made contribute to water security at least cost over the long term. And to think about how important that is in the water context, we can remind ourselves that water infrastructure is typically very capital intensive, it's very long lived, and it needs to be designed and built to account not only for shifting economic and demographic trends, but it's also highly vulnerable to changes in the water cycle that are coming down the line with climate change. So this means we really have to emphasize a strategic approach to investment planning that we call pathways, to make sure that those water investments actually deliver the anticipated benefits over their operational lifetime and avoid premature obsolescence or costly retrofitting in the future. That might mean developing new approaches to investment planning that can incorporate the value of flexibility to adjust for changing trends. It also means a need to align with other sectors such as urban development, agriculture, energy supply that affect water demand and availability, but also exposure to water-related risks. In addition, water infrastructure also often requires complementary reforms or investments in institutions and information systems. One concrete example of that is for any type of investment in storage, dams, conveyance, water supply, irrigation that requires the resource to be available to function at capacity, really needs to rely on a robust water allocation system to make sure that there's predictable and secure access to the resource over time. And finally, just the last point here, basin-wide perspective is also needed. Considering that these are shared resources and what some users do, of course, affects others. And also taking a basin-wide perspective can open up the potential to exploit interdependencies among investments. For example, where upstream investments in wastewater treatment, for example, can unlock opportunities in downstream investments, for example, related to fisheries and other types of productive uses of the resource. So with that, I'll leave it there and thank you for your attention and look forward now to our next speaker. Yes, thank you, Haje.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Xavier and Kathleen, for this excellent presentation. And with that, over to you, Esther. AXA, please.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for having us, AXA, here at the OECD talk on water. So the idea is that as the largest insurance group in the world, we have two main activities, insurance and investments. And the interesting thing is that the way we choose to actually insure or what we choose to invest in will actually change a lot for water resources and water management over the world. Water is not a factor for production, is not an input for productions per se for AXA, but throughout our clients, largest corporate players in the world, and through our retail clients, we can actually have an impact, a positive one, we hope. So we are currently building a water and oceans strategy, which aims to actually overhaul all of our different lines of businesses, insurance and investments, and try to understand how we can better impact the resource. So let me give a couple of examples of the lines of businesses we're actually looking at in the coming month. First thing is that because water is at the crossroads of the world's major economic and social challenges, we're first looking at health. You know that 800,000 deaths per year are due to waterborne diarrheal diseases. It's of course, one of the main topics as a health insurer to actually tackle water resources. The problem is that we're looking at a population which is very vulnerable and which is often not insured if you're looking at emerging countries. So we are looking at beyond our action as pure insurers, we're looking at being partners on the ground with populations who are vulnerable to ill water. That means being on the ground for prevention services, providing information on what good water and bad water is, on financing programs that can help have access to better water, and it also means providing as much information, because information is key to preventing your risks. It means providing as much information as we can on where to actually find good water. And this is something we're working on in many emerging countries where access is present. The other thing is infrastructures. So you mentioned the financing gap, which is huge. Now, like most huge institutional investors, infrastructures, unfortunately, do not represent a lot in our portfolio assets. It runs in between 2 and 5%, and it would be a good thing, I think, in the years to come to actually increase that part. We'll actually come back to this point later with the high-level expert group conclusions on how to actually reorient and mobilize capital flow, private capital flow into infrastructures. The third topic is energy. Of course, through our investments and insurance activities, we have a huge impact on what energy can bring to water resources. To take one example, I will talk about parametric insurance, which is the idea that you actually index your insurance to a parameter, which it's often exogenous, meaning that if you are insuring hydroelectric production, you are indexing your insurance on a minimum amount of rainwater that will fall into 1 month. If you are under this amount of rainwater, then you assume that the producer of hydroelectricity could not produce the amount of the contract, and then AXA enters and actually covers the price of the energy to actually allow the producer to buy it elsewhere. So the good thing about this is that it's very simple to understand, and it's always important for insurance products to be simple, because if they're simple, they're inclusive and understandable and transparent. So parametric insurance has done a lot in terms of better water management. We have it for energy and hydropower products, but we also have it for agriculture, meaning that we are also insuring some of the poorest regions in India or in Southeast Asia with products to actually protect farmers from their exposition to drought risks. I talked about energy and agriculture altogether. Of course, there's also industrial production. So you know that all industries who actually use water and throw it back into river streams are covered by liability. But we're aiming to actually go further on this and try to accompany our industrial clients in, even though it's not our main expertise, we're trying to accompany them in the way they actually treat the water and put it back into river streams. It's very difficult for an insurer to actually tackle the problem of common good, because a common good is not by essence insurable. The risk is too high, and nobody would actually pay a premium that high to protect yourself. But we really believe, and it's actually our group policy, that by partnering with our clients and not just being there to pay the claims, but by partnering, we can actually better inform them and try to anticipate the risk. Again, a safer world is good for everyone. A 2-degree world is insurable, a 4-degree world is not. So we're really looking at informing and better preventing the risks as much as we can. This was the part on water as a major economic, environmental, and social challenges. I have to talk very quickly about water risks, meaning huge water-related risks such as natural disasters, and very small water-related risks such as water leakages you can have in your homes. So of course, AXA has to integrate the risk of the increasing risks of water-related disasters. Hurricane Sandy cost over $500 million to Con Edison. These are huge risks, and if we don't take them into account, if we don't prepare our clients to such risks, then we won't be even able to cover them. And that's when the state actually comes in general, when you have huge natural disasters, they are declared as public emergencies, and the states actually comes with AXA to help pay the claims. I talked about, so this was about huge natural disasters. Coming back to micro disasters, the ones that you can have every day in your lives, such as water leakages, they're important for you to know that, you know, we're wasting 30% of our water consumption through water leakages. So we're actually investing as much as we can into different types of innovations, among which water meters, of course, which can help us actually understand when you are wasting water and how we can actually alert you so that you can take action and stop losing water and not having the effect on your water bill in the end of the month. So we're partnering with water utilities on that sense. So these are basically the main areas in which we're trying to build our responsibility in water management. Of course, we're doing a lot of engagements across our shareholders, across our clients, to better integrate the water risk and be more aware of water resource management in general. Because even though everyone knows it's a problem, it's not often that you'll see companies with a very precise water roadmap, unfortunately. The problem being that water is not priced, as you all know. So because we don't have a price, we're short of metrics that can help us talk to our CFOs, to our CEOs. And as long as we don't have clean metrics and standards and methodologies, it'll be very difficult for us to integrate the water risks as much as we can. So we'll talk about it later. We have a lot of engagements. We were, of course, very present for the high-level expert group on sustainable finance. We made it clear that there had to be a recommendation on agriculture, natural capital, and of course, water. We're also having, we're very into the environmental reporting. We're assessing our direct and indirect water impacts. It's currently ongoing. And we're hoping that through different outreach with the OECD, with EPE, which is Entreprises pour l'Environnement, with WWF, whom we're talking, we're hoping that the water subject is going to gain momentum in AXA and around the insurance sector in general, and across, of course, the finance world in general. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Esther, for this. Thank you, Esther, for this great brief introduction to AXA and its approach to the water sector. And something that I took away was for you from as one of the biggest players saying, well, a 2-degree world is insurable, a 4-degree world is not. So I think that's a very catchy way to highlight, what we're actually talking about, coming from somebody like representing from AXA. So I'm getting here some questions from you, dear listener, on the web. But maybe to kick off the discussion, I would have one question to Xavier or Kathleen, following up on what Esther is saying now. Private finance has been around. I mean, there has been quite a bit of optimism that private finance would see the economic case and would step in. Now, that has not really materialized. So back to you. I mean, why are we more optimistic? Has the context changed? Does everybody listen to the 3 T's of OECD and thereby kind of sees opportunities arising? So what is your take on that? Kathleen, Xavier? Thank you, Haje, for that easy question. Indeed, I think the context has changed quite radically. The first thing is that global economic growth has generated new finance capacities globally, including in a number of developing countries. Over the years, expectations were high that the international finance sector was able to put its money into the water sector, and these expectations have been, have failed to materialize. But now there are more opportunities for domestic financiers in most countries, including in developing countries, to mobilize part of the savings which are available in these countries to invest in water-related infrastructure. So that's quite a step change because you can now rely on domestic financing resources. I think also the global community better understand the value of water and the risks of not investing into water. I think the statement made by Esther on AXA is a clear demonstration again to that investors realize that if companies don't figure out clearly the exposure to water risks, there is a chance that the business model of these businesses, whatever the sector or industry they're active in, may actually fail over the time because they will not be able to address the risks related to water. So I think this idea is more domestic finance available, more awareness about the value of water and the benefit of investing into water our main changes. And the last one, we also have a better understanding of how to combine different sources of finance. What are the risks and the appetite for risks of different types of finances? And so what are the arrangements, including the contractual arrangements, that can harness these different sources of finance and bring them together? So these would be my three main pillars, but Kathleen may have better ideas.
No, I completely agree with that. I'll just add a couple of other maybe reasons for optimism that I think we've heard about in the context of developing the roundtable. One is that I think that you really see a real diversity of actors in the private finance space. I don't think that was really the case so much when we were having these discussions 10 years ago or even before. But you see impact investors developing interesting models. You see more institutional investors who are asking the question, how could we get involved? You see different new vehicles and financing models as well. For example, green bonds. And I have to say, we also have a number of colleagues in the room who have really led the way on green finance and investment in terms of the climate perspective. And I think, that discussion has made a huge amount of progress over the past 10 years. And I think that there are some of the more forward-thinking actors in the private finance space, whether they're commercial banks or institutional investors or others, who have really understood and taken action on the climate issue and are now asking the question more broadly around what they can do in other spaces for ESG requirements, including water. So I think that's also another reason for optimism. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I mean, can I just come back here? We have an excellent question here coming from Natesh. And Natesh is saying, well, tackling water resources is often left to government. How do you get a largely uninterested private sector community become aware of opportunities in water investments? So largely not really interested private community. I mean, you were, Xavier, referring to opportunities especially to the private sector, and here we have a colleague saying, well, they're not really interested. But then also the other question is, how do you get farmers to understand the cost of water and the willingness to pay for it? So maybe back to you. I mean, here we see a certain skepticism coming from a colleague listening on the web.
Of course.
Okay, over to you, Esther.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to say that perhaps it was true some years ago that there was no interest. Not necessarily because the issue wasn't interesting, but because it wasn't signaled in a way that financial players and investors would see it. Financial investors and players, they need tools, metrics, figures, standards. And the problem is that natural capital, the environment and biodiversity, was not at all translated with those tools. Now we have them. We've been having them for quite some years now. So I would say it's not the case anymore. It's not like 20 years ago when working on climate or the environment was a sort of hippie thing. Right now, it's right down into the company's interest. Look at the One Planet Summit in December. No financial player is out of this discussion right now. So this is one very positive comment, I'd say. And the second thing is, now that we're having more and more European, international, and huge players working on these fields, I think in the years to come, we're getting there. I mean, in a sense, we're having those metrics. They're there, and we're integrating them into our risk assessments and into our strategies. So it's not at all the same thing as a few years ago.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, the second point of the question was about farmers, and obviously this has been an issue in OECD countries and beyond on how to make on pricing or well, pricing may not be the appropriate way of framing the issue. The question is making sure that people, and I mean users and farmers in particular, realize the value of water. And I think that message is going through, and farmers fully understand the value of having secured access to water. Now the question is how to capture that value and how to transform that into a model of finance, a business model or financing model to invest in the infrastructure that can secure access to water. So here there are very different experiences over the world. I just want to take the illustration of, which is quite well known, of Australia and the Murray-Darling Basin, where farmers realized that, okay, they had an entitlement to use water, but that entitlement was only on water, on paper, sorry, if there is no water into the river. And if you want to make sure that there is water into the river, you have to somehow recognize the value of water, and they went all the way towards tradable water rights. I'm not saying this is the best option. I'm not saying this should be the one model, but the point is that when you realize the risks of not having water, you better understand you are more incentive to explore different opportunities to make the appropriate investment.
Thanks a lot. Maybe a direct question back to Esther. One of colleagues here on the web is a bit saying, well, great introduction, great presentation by AXA, but could you give a concrete example for what you just referred to, you know, a private actor that is on the ground that you're working directly with, you know, to make a concrete example and illustrate that? That's one of the questions coming in here.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I actually mentioned a very important example that I think is for agriculture and water. I already mentioned it. I couldn't disclose now the name of the clients, but we're working with tea factories, notably in India, with tea farmers, which are representing a very poor and excluded population. We're actually helping them with two things. First thing is better understand how they can insure themselves. This is important because they're working in water-stressed areas. They don't know if they'll have their jobs tomorrow. So this is not directly related to water, but we're helping water labor actually better understand how their own risks in dealing with water can be integrated. This is the first thing. Second thing, on the water itself, for the same farmers, we're actually looking at how much water they actually need per month to produce the amounts of tea that have been agreed on through what we call a contract farming. So they're actually dealing with a huge tea company in the world, and if they don't have access to that water, either because it was diverted, either because there was not enough, then we actually enter. We set a fixed parameter of how much water they need, and if they don't have access to that much water, then we actually insure production. So we insure farmers to actually have their at least a basic revenue at each end of the month, and that's very precious, I think.
Great, thanks a lot. Just I'm interacting to some of the questions that are coming in. There's one question, and I'm jumping a bit here, in regard to cryptocurrency and to help in mobilizing financing to traditional underserved areas. So that's an issue also, once again, about, well, how do you actually reach out to populations that are very, very difficult to reach? So do you see something, an opportunity here from cryptocurrencies? I guess that also refers to blockchain. That's my limited knowledge of this. Colleagues are asking themselves who to take that question.
Everybody, frankly, it's a great question, and I can prove it. Everybody is embarrassed to provide an answer. My immediate answer is that it's a fascinating area for reading at this stage. I must say I still have to get a clearer understanding of what are the opportunities related to cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and the like. This is an area where the OECD is very active, not typically on financing water at this stage, but we are monitoring what colleagues are doing in that area and look into the opportunities or risks or challenges that may generate in the water sector. So very good point. Work in progress. Stay with us, and we hope that in the coming month we'll be able to come up with a clear answer. but Kathleen may wish to supplement that.
I was just going to add that, well, I haven't seen any discussion specifically around cryptocurrencies, but I think it's an interesting question. And what we can say is that we have seen some interesting payment models that can be better adapted for lower income households and in some contexts. So for example, prepaid water meters, for example, that allow people with perhaps variable incomes to be able to prepay their service to water when they have the money available. Or mobile payments, for example. This is something that we hear more and more about in developing countries where people are just in a cashless situation, but can basically deal with payments via their mobile phone, which can help to connect access for rural customers. So, I mean, just to make the point that there are some interesting innovations happening there, and this is definitely some area to watch to see how much those examples can be scaled up and become part of the solution.
Right, thank you. Kathleen, maybe Esther, now we were a bit on the micro level, maybe we jump to the macro level. So you referred to the high-level expert group on sustainable financing. They brought out a report, you mentioned that. Some of the recommendations you already were kind of referring to, but what are those that, you think AXA, where AXA has a special connect to, and where you maybe think that the high-level group has not really found yet the right recommendations, or they may need to strive a bit further. So from the macro to the macro, macro to the macro.
So I think it's better to say in the other way that the high-level expert group was very ambitious and that we need actually companies to follow through with that. So first of all, I think that the message that's important through this group and the report it provided is that there is money out there. I mean, we could actually, fill in the financial gap very quickly. The problem is that we need tools that financial people use to actually fill in that gap. And that's what the report tried to do, was that we try to actually match the wide range of projects with the huge amount of money that's there, and that can obviously has problem in matching. There's a mismatch problem. So what the high-level expert group is provide different tools for different agents, different governance schemes, and different sort of financial culture by trying to align and extend the time horizon of finance. The time horizon of finance for now is not aligned with the timing of resources, of people, of health, of education. If you put your kids to school, you don't put them for a year or two, you put them for at least 10 years. It's the same with financing resources or infrastructures. You need to have at least a 5-year or 10-year horizon. And it's very difficult for now for financial players to actually have that sort of horizon. So regarding water specifically, we made it very clear that the high-level expert group had to have a section on, actually at least a recommendation on natural capital, agriculture, and marine resources. And if I take a sort of blend of all the recommendations that were in there, I'd have to choose from the fact that we recommend that, the high-level expert group recommends that companies take into account every environmental and social externalities. That's very hard to do, but for now it's something that companies are striving to do. So externalities. Second thing is integrate ESG factors into investor duties, meaning that when all of you here in this room or outside invest money, in general, you have no transparency or very little transparency as to where your money goes. If you take all the small livrets that you have in France, you don't generally necessarily know where it goes. So we need more transparency from investors. Third thing is water as part of natural capital. We need to foster the assessment of the value of water through the use of standard metrics, methods for quantifying, reporting, monitoring, and managing natural capital risks and opportunities. Of course, we are basing this work on natural capital protocol. We're trying to have science-based targets, but I think it's a major breakthrough to actually have that in the report. Fourth, last thing is increase the access to capital for natural capital investments. When you're a farmer and you want to deal with your water properly, it's actually very difficult to access banks, because your project, again, has a 4 or 5 year horizon, and banks who actually understand that and want to improve this, it's not necessarily a very widely common acceptance. And the last thing is improved disclosures. And for me, that's one of the most important things. When you buy food or when you export food, you have very little information on what you're actually eating. I could go as far as saying that, the agribusiness sector is one of the hugest topics which we should actually deal with, because we don't know what we're eating. So same thing for water. I'd like to know when I buy an apple, what share of pesticides was actually used in that within the supply chain. What was the water footprint? Does it come, if it comes from Kenya or if it comes from Germany, what was the kind of CO2, water, social footprint that's embedded in the product? And so disclosures are a main topic of interest. And now I think the high-level group, expert group, went further than what companies can do.
Thanks a lot, Esther, for that. I'm always surprised traveling quite a bit, where you find water from Italy, for example, you kind of wonder, whether there's no water locally available. I could also refer to French water, obviously, as well. There are lots of questions coming in, colleagues here. Thanks for that. We will not be able to cover this. There's one by Martin saying little attention, and this is then for Xavier and Kathleen, little attention is being given to the security of return for private sector investments other than third-party guarantees. What is successful and where? So it's a new issue of, what kind of financing instruments. Are we already that far that we can give an answer to that in our research? Because I assume bits and part of that also part of the deep dive we're going to do. But what do you?
Well, I think it's a very valid question. I said earlier that we better understand the diversity of the finance community, and each of these different subgroups, if you like, in the finance community have different expectations in terms of risks and returns. So the beauty of blending finance, the instrument that Haje introduced earlier today, is that blended finance provides opportunities to combine different sources of finance, making sure that the different partners in the investment will be able to cover the risks they are best equipped to cover, and they will have the return that they expect from a particular from that particular investment. Typically, a VC firm needs an exit strategy. That's not the case for a commercial bank. An institutional finance an institutional financer will look for long-term return and may not be interested in short-term returns. IFIs, they have their own they have their own expectations. So again, the idea is to better understand what are the expectations of the different partners, different financial partners, and try to develop contractual arrangements to make sure that they will get the return that will match their expectation. Not an easy solution, and actually one that is quite tricky, because as Esther said, financiers like standard solutions. They don't like to reinvent a specific model for each business opportunity or investors opportunity they face. So at some point, there will be some benefit in trying to standardize or industrialize, if you like, that kind of arrangements. So it's really the beginning of a dynamic that can, that will take some time to develop and materialize.
Yeah, if I could just also add as well, we've been talking about blended finance, which is certainly very interesting. We want to have a deep dive into that. But of course, the way OECD is approaching blended finance is really focused on developing countries. Our work is broader, focusing also on advanced economies. And so when we come to this question around private finance and how they can be sure about their return and what kind of instruments can be used, I think there's actually quite some good examples in some OECD countries. For example, we have a colleague from Israel here in the room with us, and Israel has a number of different examples where they have provided guaranteed tariff schemes for extended number of years, that basically provide security for the private investors to come in and invest in water supply and sanitation. They've been extremely successful in this type of model. The U.S. is also doing interesting things with regard to trying to mobilize commercial finance in the water area. They've passed an act called the WIFIA, which is the Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act, that explicitly uses then the credibility of the Treasury to cover some of the risk associated with large water investments. And I also think the UK is a very good example where you have an independent economic regulator, Ofwat, who sets prices and tariffs and provides a security for the market and gives confidence for investors. So I think those are also some good examples of where private sector can feel comfortable getting engaged in the water space.
Great. Given that time is coming somewhat to an end, I have the challenge here to kind of pick some of the more juicier questions here that we are getting. It's a pity that we cannot answer that. There's, for example, one on natural infrastructure. So are you, to AXA, to Esther, that's you, are you contemplating the opportunity to invest in natural infrastructure, such as wetlands restoration, to reduce water risk? So that's one. Just a second one, so that was for Nina. From Paulo, there's a question. On the topic of sustainable subsidies for water and sanitation, are some interesting examples coming from the Global South? So can we learn from the Global South when it comes to sustainable subsidies? I would assume yes, we can. And then I think one nice one here also, once again, is to you, Esther. Sasha is asking, can AXA comment on the trend and role of rating agencies in lowering ratings for entities without water risk or climate resilience factored into their investment? So, and I think a nice one. Yeah, I think I'll leave it with that. 3 questions. Who would like to pick which one? Esther, you want to go first?
Yes. On the first 2, I'd say yes. I mean, the second one on sustainable subsidies, of course, we can learn. But I'd let you to, Kathleen and Xavier, respond to this. On wetlands, I can't confirm that we're actually, I can't confirm that we're actually investing. I can't. I can't confirm. But we are actually investing in what we call impact funds. And they are actually investing in quite a projects that include natural capital infrastructures, and I know wetlands, but I couldn't confirm today the amount or the exposure that we have to this sort of investments. And on rating agencies, it is a real issue, notably the ability of rating agencies to actually rate what is sustainable, meaning that to rate what is sustainable, we need to make sure we agree on a definition of sustainable investments. That's the point of having what we call a sustainable taxonomy. So it takes time for actually rating agencies to take this into account. The question was, how do you actually rate and not hinder the return without integrating water and environmental criteria? That was the question, right?
I think the question was, what is the role of rating agencies in regard to the risks that comes from entities which do not take water risk properly into account into their investments?
Well, this is very tricky, and I think it would really deserve much more time. Rating agencies have a lot of constraints, either from the FSB in the United States, as a global agency, and from the European Commission. They are integrating a sustainable taxonomy to enable them to actually better rate actors who are not taking into account ESG factors. But I won't develop this here today. I think it's better to have a real conversation. I'm open to it actually afterwards. Yeah.
Very quickly, the point on nature-based solution, I think, is topical. We better understand how these nature-based solutions can provide sometimes cheaper, but also more longer term and adaptable solutions. One of the major challenge here is the absence of a track record that can really make the case for finances. This is an issue we have covered in a report that was published in 2015 on titled Water and Cities. So I would encourage the person who asked the question to look into that document because we don't have time to expand more on this. The question about sustainable subsidies, that's an interesting combination of words coming from an OECD perspective. I think the point here that we better understand that public money can be used wisely, and similar points with development finance. I think our colleagues in the development community better understand how development finance can be used to harness other sources of finance instead of cutting other sources of finance out. And I think that's the same rationale for what I wouldn't call sustainable subsidies, but a use of public money that would be wise if it can help attract other sources of finance. And I think we're learning how to arrange that. So that's really an area for further progress.
Great, thanks a lot. With the time basically up, I think I would like to ask all three of you, if you would have had more time as an appetizer for next time, you know, we're taking the mic here, what would I like to talk about when it comes to financing the water sector? So what is a topic you were not able to talk about, but you would really like to talk about, just as an appetizer for session 2 of Green Live on financing the water sector? Who goes first?
Well, I would,
Okay, Kathleen.
Okay, I would jump in, and if I may, I would just highlight two things. One is that we talked about financing water in a very generic way, and in fact, when we're talking about that, we're really talking about a real heterogeneous range of investments. It's water supply and sanitation, that's flood protection, that's scarcity management, that's water quality improvement. And in fact, those are very different from a water security point of view in terms of the goals we're trying to achieve, but they're also very different in terms of the investment proposition and which types of investment sources are more appropriate. So I would have gone into those details. And the other one also to add would be to talk a little bit more about the nature-based solutions as part of that.
Two quick points. The first one is operation and maintenance. We put a lot of emphasis today on investment, which is fine. That's a big part of the question. But also, I mean, we have to understand that if infrastructure are not properly operated and maintained, they will decay and will not deliver as expected. So, and the capacity to finance operation and maintenance is quite different from the capacity needed to finance investment. So I think the discussion should not be captured by investment only. O&M costs are essential. And the other point I would like to discuss at more length is how, I mean, we have talked a lot about financing water as if that money was supposed to be water money or water investment. I would like to explore more how investment in urban development, energy, land use and agriculture can actually contribute to water security, even though that money will not be tagged as water-specific finance, because there are huge amounts of investment. Think about urban development that will actually affect water availability now and in the future. If that investment could be made in a way that contributes to water security instead of building future liability, that would be a major step change. And that leads to the point of valuing water, which was highlighted by our Dutch colleagues at the end of the high-level panel on water that delivered its messages 3 weeks ago. I think all that leads to a better understanding of the value of water and how that value can be translated or can inform investment decisions in a wide range of sectors far beyond the water community itself.
I also have 2 points that would be great to raise. The first one is that on climate, we have the 2-degree the 2-degree metric that everybody knows about, and it's sort of a one metric takes all. So everybody knows about it, but in a sense, it focuses everything on climate and on CO2 emissions, and we don't have the same thing for water, which is why when I go to my CFO, my CEO, I need to find the good thing to attract his attention. So, I mean, I'm launching out a call to find this new metric for water, and something that could be as easy marketing as the 2-degree as the 2-degree world that was issued from the Paris Agreements. And second thing is that we rely a lot on the information provided by NGOs. When we decide to divest from coal or to divest from tobacco, we use a lot in international institutions or NGOs to know what's going on locally. And so I can say that this or this company does not comply with access standards on coal or on tobacco, so I can divest or I can disengage from business with them. We don't have the same thing for water. Even though there's a lot of NGOs and international institutions on water, we still need our metrics locally so that I can say, so that I could say, for instance, well, I do not want to engage in any business, or I do want to engage business with this company because I know that locally what they're doing for water is good. And so we really need much more local metrics to help us make the good insurance and investment decisions.
Great, thanks a lot. Thanks to Esther, Xavier, and Kathleen. Thanks to all of you who tuned in. Thanks to the colleagues who were not able to ask a question, who are in a crowded room, I can tell you this. Apologies to all the people that sent in questions, and I was not able to pick it up. There are quite a number of them, and I'm sure that we are going to, in an appropriate fashion, respond to these questions. Thanks a lot. I'm not going to wrap up, just to say when I asked for 3 topics to talk about, I got 6, which is obviously an indication of how important this topic is and how much more needs to be said about it. So with that, thanks to all colleagues, and yeah, have a nice afternoon.